Okay. Remembering our vision, we are disciples of Jesus Christ, growing in his likeness, reflecting God's love and generous service to others, embracing God's diverse creation, which we embody in joyful worship. And we're focusing on generous service to others in this class and how Esther and all that applies to it. I have a question for you to start with this morning. Who was a significant influence in your life that encouraged you to serve others? Mine was my mom. My mom was just amazing. She was always doing for other people. And when people say, "You're just like your mom," that is just one of the best compliments I get. So, that's immediately who I think of. Does anybody else have somebody that just was, they can think of, that just was great encouragement to them? Good. And I did it because of mom, so it trickles down, doesn't it? Yeah. Anybody else have anybody that they have?
No. Sorry.
My oldest brother, I had a wonderful father, but in some ways my brother was more of an influence on me. I was in college at Abilene, and I'd just drive down to their house, and without announcing myself, and they'd take me in and everything. He was a wonderful person.
It's a lot of family members. Is anybody else? Okay. So let's have Esther 1. If you'll read that out to us, I'll give you the microphone so everybody can hear.
One through 22?
Yeah, read the whole chapter for me. All the hard words and names.
Excuse my pronunciation of all of these names. This is what happened during the days of Xerxes. Xerxes, who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes resigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, and in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed gardens of the king's palace for all the people from the least to the greatest who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen fastened with cords of white and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of profile, marble, mother of pearl, and costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the hall in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day, the King Xerxes was in high spirits for wine. He commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him: Mehuman, Istah, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagatha, Zathar, and Caracas, to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people of the nobles. For she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned his anger. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king: Ashina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Arsina, and Memphis, the 7 nobles of Persia and Media, who had special access to the king and were highest in the kingdom. According to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? He asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. Then Memphis replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti was done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the peoples of the province of King Xerxes. But the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day the Persian and the Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the nobles, king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all the vast realm, and the women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest. The king and his nobles were pleased with the advice, so the king did a Memphis proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his own household, using his native tongue.
All right, so
It's been 180 days showing off his kingdom, which we have a map of here from all the way from Egypt to Greece. It's just, I'm terrible at geography, as we determined last Sunday. So he spent a lot of time showing off his wealth. Do you think that's all he's doing, is showing off his wealth? Maybe a little politicking going on. So 180 days, he's building up to this banquet that lasts 7 days. Remember, he's a conqueror, he's going around, so he's probably showing off his wealth. See how strong I am, don't defy me, just go along with things. Elaborate furnishings, it describes in detail, marble floors, tables, goblets made out of gold, each one different, custom-made goblets by hand, not just poured in a mold and made. These were all different. This was quite lavish. And this is the place to be if you're anybody. And it was from the least to the greatest that were there. So he's showing off. He's probably doing a little politicking, making sure that nobody's defining him. Because 127 provinces. That's like the governors of each. They're ruling over things. They're not fighting men in them. Everything's good, right? Then he says, after 7 days, I got to show off my queen. Let's go tell my queen to come and show up. Let's go to Vashti. Now, she herself is giving a banquet for the women in the royal palace. She's probably doing a little bit of the same thing as her husband. She's probably making sure she's schmoozing a little bit, keeping the peace, maybe currying some favors here and there around. And she gets this thing, come come see the king. The king wants you to throw on your crown and come show off your beauty to him. And she refuses. Now, I did some looking around, and there's various thoughts out there maybe why she refused. Does anybody have any ideas? Why do you think she didn't want to go do this? Or why she didn't do this? Why she refused the king's order?
I'm guessing she had to be more covered.
Maybe she had to be more covered? It's a thought, but remember, she's not Jewish. This is a mixed nationality. She's probably of royal blood. There was even some thought that she might have been King Belshazzar's daughter. So she's royal blood. She's not king. I've read some theories. Some said she's supposed to appear in the nude with just her crown on, and she didn't want to do it. Well, being Jewish, definitely not. But, you know, with her, it really may not have been a big deal. Some other theories out there, you know what, she just didn't want to display in front of a bunch of drunk men, which, you know, as women, we can all agree with, yeah, right? There's even a rumor out there that maybe she had leprosy and she didn't want to see, which I'm thinking, well, she wouldn't really be throwing a banquet if she had leprosy and stuff. But there are some various theories. Either way, the Bible doesn't tell us why she refused, but she refused. And my thought is that she's, you know, whatever's happened, God is setting this up because he knows what's coming, and he knows there has to be a change coming in the palace, right? So we're talking about influence today, and we're talking about who influenced us. And some of these dawned in, so I kind of grabbed it last minute. But Xerxes had quite a bit of influence around him. One of those was Vashti. She was the queen. She was beautiful because we determined last week he liked beautiful women, right? So he surrounded himself with beautiful women. She was beautiful. She was an influence. So when she disobeyed, that was huge. And also, something else I thought of. Vashti knew when she refused that there were going to be consequences, right? I mean, she had to know that the king is not going to be pleased, and the king could have people executed at will. So it's just interesting what's going through her head at the time. So she was influenced until she disobeyed him. He had 7 experts in the law and justice, nobles of Media and Persia that were around him. Really smart men. They knew the times. They knew what was going on. They're saying, you know, they're telling him, said, you know, this is bad. And they're also, one thing that we noted on that they say that the nobles and peoples were also done wrong. This wasn't just done wrong to the king. It affected everybody in the kingdom. And so when the advisors started talking to him, they were a little biased, saying, this is going to come back to haunt us if something isn't taken care of, right? So his personal attendants, he had all kinds of nobles. He had just personal attendants who were going, king, you know, what happened's not good. And so they get him to declare a law. Queen Vashti is no longer to appear in the palace. And somebody has, let's go ahead and read chapter 2, verses 1 through 18. I think, Presley, you had that?
Okay.
And see, let's read a little more about this.
Later, when the anger of the king Xerxes had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. Then the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all the beautiful girls into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Hagar, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. And let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shemel, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiachin, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl was also known as Esther. She was lovely in form and feature, and Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many girls were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Haggai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, whom had charge of the harem. The girl pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he provided her with her beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 maids selected from the king's palace and moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what had happened to her. Before a girl's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfume and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Shashag, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summons her by name. When the turn came for Esther the girl, Mordecai had adopted the daughter of his uncle, Abihail, to go to the king. She asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, the month of Tebet, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king had a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all the nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the province and distributed gifts with royal liberality.
Okay, so I read that he gave an edict about Vashti, and he gives more edicts later on, which if you've read Esther, you know or all the story. What is the edict? Let's talk about edicts between the Persians and the Medes. Remember the story of Daniel in the lion's den, and why Daniel got thrown in the lion's den. Let's see why these edicts are such a big thing.
I'll get it there.
That's okay. And it's Daniel 6, 8 through 12.
I'm not wearing a suit, but I'm an old man too. Now, Your Majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, Your Majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed.
Once it's there, it's there. And if you remember, the king did everything he could to keep Daniel out of the lion's den, and he couldn't even stop it. But God was able to take care of it. So, you have the edict that's gone on. All right, edict's out. Queen's no longer here. Well, Haggai is very influential to the king. He knows what the king wants. He's in charge of all the women. The concubines are the virgins, the ones that are coming in. So the king is trusting him with all of this. He's a great influence on the king. Esther becomes a huge influence on the king. She just stands out amongst everybody else. And again, the whole book of Esther is about her influence on him. So let's talk about Esther. Who is Esther? I have to admit, this is one of my favorite books in the Bible. I just love the story. And I love just Esther's attitude about everything. If you remember, she's third or fourth generation into exile at this time. So she's lived there for a long time. She's never known a temple to go to worship, but yet she's been taught about God. She was orphaned and raised by her older cousin, probably pretty young, Mordecai. And we learn later on, she does a lot of things that shows that Mordecai was a huge influence on her. She doesn't reveal her true nationality to start with on Mordecai's instructions. Later on, she finds out about the assassination attempt, and instead of taking credit for doing it, she gives credit to Mordecai. She's like, he's so important to her with everything. So that's one thing, we're talking about family members being an influence on us. She learned about God in a foreign land that worshipped other gods, and she stayed true to that. That's our society today doesn't necessarily, the culture doesn't necessarily worship God, and we have to live in that and be an influence to others. So how do keeping all this with keeping service in mind. Let's talk about Esther, and I talked a little bit about this. Haggai, in charge of the harem, she goes in and immediately stands out. Do you think she was the only Jewish girl taken? You ever thought about how many girls were taken at this time out of all the 127 provinces they went out? How many girls were taken, and she stood out amongst all of them. Haggai saw that. He gives her immediately 7 attendants, personal attendants, gives her special food, and the best place to stay. Something I was reading, you get on the online, you can start doing research and head down rabbit holes. Somebody was talking about being Jewish, you could only eat certain foods, right? You remember there were strict codes on their eating. And some were saying, well, she had to sneak food. I'm thinking, well, I think Haggai, when he gives her the special foods, she's asking probably for the Jewish foods. So, in all of this, thinking about service, in all of this, she's still serving God. She's put in a position that is unimaginable probably to us ladies today. We don't live in that culture. But we think about the culture we live in and what we do in it to serve God. Her future husband, she pleases him more than she takes advice around her. She's following God. And she's a huge influence on her future husband, Xerxes. And again, so much more in the story that comes that shows that. How do you think she accomplished all this, ladies? I want some feedback. Dawn's usually the big talker. I get straight to the point because I've done a lot of training, so I just get straight to the point. So I need some feedback. What are your thoughts on all this? What do you think? How she accomplished this in her culture?
Don't you just think it was all just God?
I think a lot of it was God. And later on, Mordecai tells her, says, you're put in this position for this, and if you don't do it, God's going to find somebody who will. So I think God had a lot to do with it. Any other thoughts? Do you think she was scared?
You know, it took a lot of courage, or even,
Women were just more or less chattel.
They were.
I mean, there was no Me Too movement back then. And whatever. Apparently, he didn't have Vashti executed. He must have maybe put her away. But she was very honorable in what she did. I don't know how much of that influence Esther. I'm sure her cousin's influence is the main thing there, but it must have taken a tremendous. It's Jewish culture. This isn't Jewish culture, except the Jews that were there. In traditional Jewish culture, a woman did not even have she didn't even have a name until she bore a son. The idea to bear a son gave a woman her identity. And you can see that through the Bible. Sometimes it won't say the woman's name, it'll say the wife of so-and-so. It was not an easy culture for a woman to live in.
And one of the things we were talking about, Don and I were talking about, was at one point there it says, I'll just find it. The women's they're not going to respect their husbands anymore, right? All the women are going to hear what Vashti did. They're going to take her as an example, and they're going to talk back to their husbands or start disobeying their husbands. And one of the customs back then was because it was a very mixed a lot of nationalities there in this time. So there were multiple languages spoken in households. So when the husband spoke to his wife in his native language, that was authority. That was like saying the full name. Anita Jewel Smith, yes, what did I do? I'm in trouble now, from your parents. So the nobles, they were very worried about this. It's like, there's going to be rebellion here, things are going to change, women are going to start talking back to their husbands, we're no longer just an uproar is going to start. So that was going through the advisors' heads. Let's see if I had the name. That was it. Nope, sorry. Click the wrong button. Usually Dawn's. So I did it again. There it is. Okay. That's the last slide I had. Like I said, Dawn has a lot more of the background, and I just kind of hit through. So I really wanted to see what a lot of your thoughts were on all this. Otherwise, we have a very short class today.
I think Mordecai, had a whole lot to do with it. He didn't just. Mordecai had a lot to do with it because he didn't just, send her off and say, good luck. He continued kind of daily to come by and check on her, and he continued to build her up and say, hey, you have a mission. You have something that you can do. You are in a very special place. Yeah. And she needed that. I wonder how old Esther was. I bet she was very, very young.
They were very young.
And can you imagine a 13 or 14-year-old? Which I'm guessing she was probably very possibly that young. And she needs the support of her family. So, as parents, we have a big role too.
Yes.
We don't just say, you're 18, go out and do right. We have to continue to do that.
Yeah, she was. I thought that too. I thought she was very young and scary. And Mordecai made sure he positioned himself around where he could. Which again, later in the book we see that a lot. So,
Don't you think she was probably a very good listener to everything that was going on around her, and quiet, and maybe in listening, she could see more how she could do the things that God had planned for her through Mordecai with his teachings, and not charging him and saying, "Now I'm a better future," but doing it in a quieter, more demure way.
I've always felt that because of the times and probably just the impression she made. She was probably a very good listener. Number one, she didn't argue when she was told to do something. When she just did them. with Haggai, right? She did what she was supposed to do. She took what she was supposed to take. You know, she listened to his advice. She listened to advice. She probably listened to people around her, watched people around her, learn from that. And that's just, again, that's who God made her to be for this very reason, right? Any other thoughts? I apologize that I rushed through things. What do you about the king? Let's get some guys, because I've been concentrating more on the women. What do you think is the king? What's going through the king's mind with everything that's going on?
I think the king, I can talk loud. I think the king at his banquet, he was like, he didn't just like lean over to his advisors and he go be passionate. He announced to everyone, I have this beautiful queen, bring her forth, and so it was really a black eye that she didn't come forth.
Well, it was embarrassing to him, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And this was the king who took a huge army and attacked the Greeks, tried to conquer the Greeks.
Yeah.
I mean, this one just, some territorial.
I'm the most important man in the world, and my queen isn't doing what I told her to do. Not good. Any other
He
thoughts?
seems sort of impulsive, like, let's do that, without really thinking it through. And then later on, Haman comes to him with these ideas, and he's just like, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea to do, and,
Probably being the king, you think he's got this huge. He doesn't know what's going on in his kingdom. He doesn't know every little place and such. He's got 127 governors that are supposed to tell him what's going on. He's got advisors that are supposed to be listening and telling him what's going on, right?
he doesn't even know Esther's Jewish.
He doesn't even know Esther's Jewish. I have Jewish people like that in my nation. So he's just like, hey, look at me. Here's I'm showing my great wealth. I mean, he's just throwing wealth around like it's nothing.
I wonder how old he is. I'm there, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of amazes me, all these people up here back there, they're really young
They are.
and, don't have any sense.
And usually these rulers, they grow up, or they get to fighting age, and they usually have the other guys assassinated to become the king, right? So he would have been, I don't know, any thoughts, Jack, on how old he'd be? No. I don't think he'd be real old, because I would say he was in like it's a time like 5th or 6th year of reign. Mid-30s? Mid-30s?
It does strike me, though, how old he is. Throughout history, men have had what's the right word? A tendency to control women.
Yes.
A powerful man is used to having a woman and everyone
Yes.
under his total control. I mean, the setup of this story is really kind of extraordinary because, the king is in charge. He can do with Vashti what he wants. He can choose Esther when he wants. And when the end comes, he's not in that much control.
Mm-hmm.
And just to watch the play of how God is going to use someone who's not usually in control to take charge of the situation on behalf of people.
And is that situation still in the world today? Yeah. It is. So there's still situations women may be in, men may be in, that they're still having to think, how do I serve God in this situation? Or Mordecai. How would you feel as a parent, an uncle, an aunt, all of a sudden your daughter, your niece gets taken in and becomes part of a harem to possibly become queen? How do you handle that? Mordecai says, go, but don't tell him you're Jewish. Again, it's his culture, it's not our culture. Any thoughts on Mordecai's feelings?
I really feel like he had some sense that this was an opportunity.
Yes.
I mean, he just seems like he is paying attention and looking for something. I mean, of course, he doesn't know the future. He doesn't know what Haman's going to do or anything, but he just, I really have always felt that way, that he sees this as an opportunity.
I think so, especially what he says later on to her, you know, you could be put here for a reason, for this very purpose, right? And they knew he was Jewish. But yet he was high up. At one point he's sitting at the king's gate. He's like a court official. He's very high up in the kingdom. He's known, and he's known to be Jewish. So I don't think that really bothered them, but was there a question over here or a comment?
Well, I've always thought that Mordecai must have felt like that he had taught Esther the history of her people, or he wouldn't have let her go in there, even telling her not to reveal that she was Jewish. It just felt like that, reading about it and thinking about the young lady that he had raised. He must have raised her as a daughter, telling her the stories, and that's what the Jewish people do, is they story. Every part of their life has a story, and it's true stories, but it's God in their lives. So he must have had confidence in Esther that she could remember who she was and whose she was. Or I don't think he would have let her in, because that's kind of a disastrous opportunity.
Yeah.
If you ask to speak to the king, I know this is getting dead, but if you ask to speak to the king and he says no, you're not in a good place at all.
Yeah, I think so too. We talked about that last week, that they're Jewish. That's okay. Their Jewish history was repeated down to them in stories. That's how they did it, because they just did not have their Bibles there, family Bibles they opened up at home to read. It was passed down through stories. So she had that, and I had a thought and it just went out of my mind again, which is how my mind works. It'll come back. So, any other comments? Any other thoughts? How about some of these people around them? Presley.
I don't know why Mordecai, he made a vision for this, but I would want my daughter to be queen. If I was a Jew at the time I had a daughter, I don't want to subject her to that.
Yeah.
So Mordecai must have had some kind of vision about who she's going to be. Just seems unreal to me.
God had at least moved his heart to accept that and instruct her and be there for her. So what were her duties as a queen? What did being the queen entail back then? So the kings back then had their whole concubine, they had their harem and all that. But the queen, as my understanding goes, and I kind of tried to research a little bit but just didn't get very far, is that they were like head of the household. They ran the household. They made sure everything in the palace and around there was going right. And that's not a small job. I mean, they were making sure, even Haggai was in charge of the harem, but she would have been over even him and making sure everything was going on. So this was a huge responsibility to be the queen. Plus to be there when the king needed you, do what needed to be done. I didn't know we're all involved as being the queen. And when we look at the queens today, but people do look up to them, right? We lived in Scotland for 2 years, and we happened to be there during the Queen's 60th Jubilee. And it was really, really cool to be there and see that, and the respect that people had for the Queen. And, over here we get a lot of the tabloids and everything, and over there they do some. A lot of people just really, really respect the Queen and look up to her and what she says. And I think it would have been the same here because of what Vashti had done. you know, people are like, oh no, we're in for it now. If all the women start acting like Vashti, you got to get her out of here and get somebody who's better. And so Esther's being and she's not just queen to be there for the king, but she's there as an example for the nation. And as a worshiper of God, what a great chance to be an example and to be of service to everybody there, Jewish and not. All right,
She
any
was
other?
also a showpiece for the king.
I'm sorry,
She was also a showpiece for the king.
she was a showpiece.
So she had to take care of herself, eat well, and all the beauty treatments that she had to go through.
Yeah.
And so it sounded like that was a lot.
And it sounds good. It's a woman like, wow, a whole year of beauty treatment. Yeah. I'm not much of a beauty spa person. I know women who are and women who aren't. But 6 months of one, 6 months of another, I just, day in and day out, I feel like I have better things to do with my life. I don't know about you other ladies. But, yeah. So she did, not only running things, but she had to look good doing it, right? Any other comments? What difficulties do you think we have in our culture today serving God with where we're at and what's going on? For me, it's hard to just stay focused sometimes. There's too many distractions of other things that seem to be more important but really aren't. Anybody else? How do you overcome that?
Esther was dealing with a culture that was not at all friendly to her and her background. And sometimes we live in that kind of culture too, to a certain extent.
It's true we do. You ever get, when somebody finds out you go to church, you mention going to church, that you get a look or they just assume something about you? And you're like, well, I've run into that. My kids have run into that. They've also changed people's minds. I know my daughter's had some specific stories where somebody said, you might be thinking again about going to church, just because of her attitude and her kind of her humility, as we were talking before, her humbleness and just willingness to listen and not be super judgmental. Just give some gentle advice, which I feel is a lot what Esther was. She was humble with her service and her way with other people. Anything else?
Anita?
Yeah.
I've heard stories from Maddie and Presley about being in the military and how they handled big gatherings in their home. And they did it their way. And people knew that Presley and they were not people who didn't have alcohol in their home. And they would not be served when they were coming to their home. And I think they probably, in fact, I've heard that they had friends who became good friends. And they made a difference in those people's lives by remaining true to God and to themselves.
Yeah, staying strong, staying true. And sometimes it's the little things. It's just amazing to me sometimes. I can't remember who I was talking to this morning. My dad was, I think it was Paul. My dad was one of those, he was an elder, but he was a very quiet man. He never taught Sunday school, but his life taught people. And when he passed, it was back in 2001, I had a lot of people come up and say just this one little thing that he did just changed their life. And I think, to me, Esther and Mordecai even are a lot of the little things. And sometimes the big things with standing strong and everything, but a lot of the little things are the ways we influence people around us. I'm going to go this. I need a guy to help me do our prayer verse today. Go ahead and do that, and then we can hit in there and watch the baptism. I have a volunteer. Don't leave me hanging. Somebody do our prayer? Paul, Esther appointed you, Paul. Did you do our prayer? Just a prayer for us today? Is there anybody have any prayer requests they wrote down?
I didn't get in here in time to do it. One of my good friends from high school lost her husband this week to Parkinson's.
Okay.
And she has COVID.
Oh, boy.
And several members of her family. Her daughter had the presence of mind to move them to their home in Colorado 2 years ago when her dad's Parkinson's started making it difficult for him to be a rancher. And so they live in the home with her daughter, and their college kids come back and forth, and I believe one of the college kids dropped the COVID home, unfortunately. And so they can't do the arrangements or anything. And Sandy is not well, of course, now because she's breathing as well as sick. And the last name is Killebrew.
Sandy Killebrew.
Sandy Killebrew.
She's right now. I didn't get her exact connection with you. She's a relative.
She was a great friend from high school.
Oh, okay. Is that Sandy or Sally?
Sandy.
Sandy.
Are there any updates from last week? Any of these?
Dear God, we are so thankful to be here this morning and all the good things that we've heard and the dream, Northside's dream for the future that we can be a part of it. We more remember that terrible tragedy of the people in Kentucky and other places that lost their lives through the ravaging tornado. We pray that you will give their relatives comfort at this time. We want to remember Jude and Riley and their health problems or issues, that they can be brought back to normal as soon as possible, and their parents, their whole families can get on with the important work that they're doing in San Luis. Other members here on with cancer, Kim, Barbara Myers, remember Sandy Killebrew and her problems. And there are many others that could be named that I don't have access to right now, but we could be remembering some of these people through the week and praying for them. And we're also thankful that Anita was willing to get up and teach the class today. We appreciate her ability to do this, and also be with Don as he's traveling, having interviews, and bring him back to us safely. And we pray all these things in the name of Jesus, our Savior. Amen.